It was never supposed to move. The glass was still. The letters were silent. The room was full of nervous laughter until suddenly everything changed. That rainy afternoon in Madrid, no one imagined that a simple game would open a door that could never be closed again. This is the story of a girl, a family, and something that followed them home from the darkness. In the early 1990s, in a crowded neighborhood called Vallecas, the Gutierrez family lived in a small apartment. Their life was normal, a hard-working mother raising her children after the death of her husband. School, homework, dinner together, small arguments, small dreams. Nothing unusual, nothing frightening, until Veronica began to change. At first it was only silence. She stopped laughing with her siblings. She stared at walls as if she could see something others couldn't. At school she became distant. Her friends whispered that she talked about strange dreams where shadows stood near her bed and watched her breathe. Teachers thought it was stress. Her mother thought it was teenage mood swings. Nobody knew something had already begun. One rainy day during recess, Veronica and her friends sat in a quiet corner of the school. The sky was gray. The air felt heavy. One of the girls took out a handmade spirit board. Letters drawn with pen, numbers written in circles, a small glass placed upside down in the center. They had heard older students talk about contacting spirits. It sounded exciting, dangerous, forbidden. Veronica felt a strange curiosity pulling her closer. They placed their fingers on the glass and asked softly, "Is anyone here?" For a few seconds nothing happened. Then the glass trembled. It moved slowly across the board. The girls froze. None of them admitted pushing it. The glass stopped on a letter. Then moved again. Another letter. A name began to form. A name none of them recognized. Fear replaced curiosity. One girl tried to pull her hand away, but Veronica felt unable to move. It was as if something invisible was holding her there. Suddenly a teacher entered the room and shouted at them. She grabbed the board and tore it apart. The glass fell and shattered on the floor. The moment it broke, Veronica felt a sharp pain in her chest and a whisper near her ear. A cold voice that didn't belong to anyone in the room. It said, "Now I know you." That night Veronica couldn't sleep. The apartment felt different. The silence was too deep. At around 3 in the morning she woke up unable to breathe. Her body was frozen. In the corner of her room she saw a darker shape inside the darkness. It had no face, no clear form, only a presence that filled her with terror. She tried to scream, but her voice was trapped inside her throat. After a few seconds the shadow disappeared, but the fear remained. From that night, strange things started happening in the apartment. Doors opened by themselves. Footsteps echoed in empty rooms. The television turned on at midnight, showing static and distorted sounds. Veronica's younger siblings became afraid to sleep alone. Maria tried to stay calm, telling them it was imagination, faulty electricity, old building noises. But deep inside she felt something was wrong. Veronica's behavior became more disturbing. Sometimes she fainted without warning. Sometimes she spoke in a different tone, as if someone else was using her voice. She described places she had never visited and people no one knew. Her eyes would suddenly fill with anger and then moments later with deep sadness. She begged her mother not to leave her alone, saying someone was always watching. One evening the family heard a loud crash from Veronica's room. They ran upstairs and found the wardrobe doors wide open. Clothes were thrown across the floor. The window was locked from inside. On the wall there were 3 long scratches as if made by sharp claws. Maria's hands began to shake. This was no longer imagination. Days passed and the disturbances grew violent. Glasses broke in the kitchen without being touched. Chairs moved during the night. Cold air flowed through the apartment even in summer. Neighbors started complaining about strange noises coming from their home. Maria called doctors who suggested psychological problems. She called a priest who advised prayers. Nothing helped. One stormy night the electricity went out. Thunder roared outside. The family gathered in the living room holding candles. Suddenly they heard slow, heavy footsteps coming from the hallway. The sound was too loud to belong to any child. Too deliberate. The door of Veronica's room creaked open on its own. A freezing wind entered the house and all the candles went out at the same time. In complete darkness they heard a whisper. Not from one direction, but from everywhere. A deep voice filled with anger and pain. It said, "She opened the door. Now I am here. Maria held her children tightly, feeling something unseen move past them like cold smoke. At that moment she understood their lives would never be normal again. The next morning she would make a desperate decision that would bring police and investigators into their home. But what they would discover inside that apartment would shock even the strongest minds. Because whatever had followed Veronica from that broken spirit board was not just a ghost. It was something far more dangerous. And it was only beginning to show its power. The next morning the apartment felt unusually silent. Not peaceful, but empty, like the air itself was waiting. Maria barely slept that night. Dark circles had formed under her eyes and fear sat heavily in her chest. She knew she couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. Veronica looked pale and weak, as if something had drained her energy. When Maria touched her forehead, her skin felt ice cold. By afternoon, strange noises started again. A slow dragging sound moved across the ceiling. Then loud knocks came from inside the walls. The younger children began to cry. Maria tried to stay strong but her hands were shaking. Finally she made a desperate call for help. She didn't know exactly who could solve this, but she knew she needed witnesses. She needed someone to see that her family was not imagining things. That evening, the atmosphere inside the apartment grew heavier. Veronica sat quietly on the sofa staring at nothing. Suddenly her body stiffened, her eyes rolled upward and her lips began to move. At first no sound came out. Then a deep unfamiliar voice escaped her throat. It was rough and angry. It spoke words no one could understand. Maria froze in terror. Her daughter's face twisted into an expression that didn't look human. Without warning Veronica was thrown backward against the wall. A loud thud echoed through the room. The children screamed. Maria rushed forward but an invisible force seemed to push her away. Objects started falling from shelves. A picture frame flew across the room and shattered. The lights flickered violently before turning off again. In the darkness they could hear heavy breathing. Not one person, but something else. Something large. Something unseen. The temperature dropped so quickly that their breath became visible in the air. A strong smell of sulfur filled the apartment. Maria gathered her children and ran outside into the corridor. Her heart was pounding so loudly she could barely hear anything else. Neighbors opened their doors, alarmed by the screams. Some thought it was a family fight. Others felt a strange fear without knowing why. Soon, authorities were called. When the police arrived, Maria felt a small sense of relief. Finally, someone would help. Finally, someone would believe her. But what the officers experienced inside that apartment would change everything. As they entered, the door slammed shut behind them with terrifying force. One officer tried to open it but it wouldn't move. Suddenly loud banging sounds came from every direction. A wardrobe shook violently as if something inside was trying to escape. A table slid across the floor on its own. The officers looked at each other in disbelief. They were trained to handle danger, but not this. Then they saw Veronica. She was lying on the floor unconscious. Dark marks covered her arms and neck like bruises shaped by invisible hands. Slowly she opened her eyes. Her gaze was empty and cold. She sat up without any support and began to laugh. The sound was low and unnatural. It echoed through the room like a warning. One officer later described feeling a sudden pressure on his chest, as if someone invisible was standing right in front of him. Another claimed he saw a shadow moving along the ceiling before disappearing into a corner. The fear inside the apartment became unbearable. Even the strongest men felt an urge to run. Finally, the door opened by itself. Everyone rushed outside, gasping for fresh air. Maria was crying, holding her children tightly. She kept repeating that something evil had entered their home. Something that wanted to destroy her daughter. Days passed but the horror didn't stop. Veronica's health continued to decline. She had violent seizures and terrifying visions. She spoke about a tall dark figure that followed her everywhere. She said it whispered promises of pain and death. Sometimes she begged her mother to save her. Other times she warned them to stay away before it hurt them too. One night the activity reached its peak. A powerful storm hit the city. Thunder shook the windows. Inside the apartment chaos exploded. Furniture overturned. Mirrors cracked. Deep growls echoed through the hallway. Veronica's body lifted slightly from the bed as she screamed in agony. Maria prayed louder than ever before, tears streaming down her face. Then suddenly everything stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Veronica lay still, her breathing slowed, her eyes closed peacefully for the first time in weeks. Maria felt a strange calm but also a terrifying realization. The presence that had tormented them was no longer attacking. It had taken what it wanted. Soon after, tragedy struck the family. But even after the worst moment had passed, the strange events did not completely disappear. Investigators would later document unexplained phenomena inside that apartment. The case would become one of the most chilling mysteries ever reported. People still talk about the girl who played a forbidden game, and the shadow that answered her call. Some say the spirit never truly left. Some say it still waits in silence, for someone curious enough to open the door again. And maybe, somewhere tonight, someone already has. After the tragedy, the Gutierrez family believed the nightmare was finally over. The apartment became quiet again. Too quiet. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like something is still watching from the shadows. Maria tried to rebuild her life. She focused on her remaining children, on work, on survival. But deep inside she knew peace had not truly returned. Weeks later, new disturbances began. Not as violent as before, but far more disturbing. Soft footsteps echoed in the hallway at night. Doors opened slightly and then closed again. The television turned on by itself, always showing static. Sometimes a faint whisper could be heard through the noise, like someone trying to speak from very far away. Maria convinced herself it was fear playing tricks on her mind, until one evening she found something that made her blood run cold. On the wall of Veronica's old room, new scratches had appeared. Fresh, deep, forming shapes that looked like letters. Maria stared at them for a long time before realizing what they meant. It was a message. I am still here. Her hands began to tremble. She had repainted that wall days after the incident. No one had entered the room since. No one except whatever had come through that broken spirit board. The children also started noticing things. One night the youngest woke up crying, saying he saw his sister standing near the window, smiling. But when Maria rushed in, the room was empty. Only the curtains moved slowly as if touched by invisible fingers. Soon the neighbors reported hearing strange sounds again. Heavy objects falling, low growling noises, even the smell of burning without any fire. Fear spread through the building like a disease. Some families moved away, others refused to talk about it. Investigators returned to the apartment to document the events. They set up recording devices and cameras, hoping to capture proof. For hours nothing happened. Then suddenly one recorder switched on by itself. A deep distorted voice filled the tape. It repeated the same words again and again. She opened the door. She belongs to me. When they played the tape back later, another sound could be heard in the background. A faint cry, a girl's voice calling for her mother. Maria broke down completely after hearing it. She realized the nightmare had not ended with loss. It had only changed form. Whatever presence had entered their lives was still attached to the place, and possibly to their souls. The final incident happened on a cold winter night. The electricity failed across the entire building. Darkness swallowed every room. Maria lit candles and gathered her children close. Suddenly loud footsteps began moving across the ceiling. Then the walls started shaking violently. Plates fell and shattered. Windows cracked as if something enormous was trying to force its way inside. A powerful gust of icy wind blew through the apartment. All candles went out at once. In total darkness, a tall shadow appeared near the doorway. For a moment Maria could see glowing eyes staring directly at her. She felt the same crushing fear from the first night. Then the shadow spoke. Not loud, not angry, but calm. We never left. The next second the lights returned. The shadow vanished. Everything became normal again. Too normal. As if nothing had happened. After that night, the family finally moved away. They never returned to that apartment. New tenants came and went quickly, complaining about strange noises and terrifying dreams. Some said they felt someone sitting on their bed at night. Others claimed to hear a girl whispering in the dark. Years later, the case remained unsolved. No scientific explanation could fully describe what happened there. Official reports mentioned unexplained movements, mysterious sounds, and psychological terror experienced by multiple witnesses. But the most chilling part of the story is this. Some visitors who researched the incident claimed to see a handmade board hidden in a closet inside the abandoned apartment. Old, damaged, covered in dust, and sometimes, late at night, the glass on that board moves by itself. Very slowly, very deliberately, as if something is still trying to spell a message, waiting for someone curious enough to place their fingers on it, and open the door once again. Because once the darkness knows your name, it never truly forgets you. Do you believe a door can stay open, even after it is destroyed? Because some doors are not made of wood or glass. Some doors are made of fear, curiosity, and the human soul. Years passed after the Gutierrez family left that cursed apartment in Vallecas. The building still stood in the same crowded street, surrounded by noise, traffic, and ordinary life. From the outside nothing looked unusual. Children played near the entrance. Neighbors carried groceries upstairs. Lights turned on and off in the evening like any other home. But inside one particular apartment, time seemed frozen. People who moved there never stayed long. Some left after a few weeks. Some after a single night. They all had different reasons. Strange sounds. Terrifying dreams. The feeling of being watched. A heavy presence that followed them from room to room. One young couple rented the place hoping to start a new life. They laughed when they heard old rumors about ghosts. They said such stories were only superstition. On their first night everything was calm. They slept peacefully, but at exactly 3:15 in the morning, both of them woke up at the same time. They heard slow footsteps in the hallway. At first they thought it was a neighbor. Then they realized the sound was inside their apartment. The bedroom door was slightly open. A thin line of darkness stretched across the floor. The woman felt her heart beating faster. She whispered her partner's name, but he was already sitting up, staring at the door with wide eyes. The footsteps stopped. Then the door opened completely on its own. No one was there, but the air became freezing cold. They left the apartment the next morning and never returned. Stories like this spread quietly through the neighborhood. Some people believed them, others didn't. But one thing was certain. The apartment was never truly peaceful again. Years later, a group of investigators decided to document the case. They were not afraid of ghosts. They believed every mystery had a logical explanation. They brought cameras, recorders, temperature sensors, and notebooks full of questions. They planned to spend the entire night inside. At first everything seemed normal. They joked with each other. They explored every room. They even found old newspaper articles about the tragic events that had happened there. One of them discovered something else inside a dusty cabinet. A broken handmade spirit board. Its letters were faded. The surface was cracked, but the glass piece still lay in the center as if waiting. They placed it back and continued their investigation. Around midnight the first strange event occurred. One of the cameras suddenly stopped working. The screen turned black. A low static noise filled the silence. Another device began recording by itself even though no one had touched it. When they checked the playback, they heard a faint whisper repeating a single word. Stay. They tried to remain calm. They told themselves it was equipment failure. But deep inside they felt something was wrong. At 2:30 in the morning, the temperature inside the apartment dropped dramatically. Their breath became visible in the air. One investigator felt a sharp pain in his chest and had to sit down. Another reported seeing a shadow move quickly across the kitchen wall. They checked the footage later. For a brief second, a tall dark shape appeared near the ceiling before disappearing. Then came the moment none of them could forget. At exactly 3:15, a loud bang echoed from Veronica's old bedroom. They rushed inside. The broken spirit board was now lying in the middle of the floor. The glass piece was moving. Slowly, deliberately. None of them were touching it. The investigators stood frozen in terror as the glass slid from one letter to another. A word began to form. Then another. The movement became faster as if something was growing impatient. Finally, the glass stopped. The message was clear. You came back. Suddenly the lights went out. Total darkness swallowed the apartment. Heavy footsteps surrounded them. Something brushed against their shoulders like cold smoke. One of them felt invisible fingers tightening around his throat. Another started screaming that someone was standing behind him. When the lights returned a few seconds later, the spirit board was broken into two pieces. And the glass had disappeared. The investigators left immediately. Their official report described unexplained physical phenomena, sudden fear responses, and possible hallucinations caused by environmental factors. But privately, none of them could forget what they had experienced. After that night, the apartment was sealed for a long time. Dust gathered on the windows. Silence filled the rooms. But silence does not mean absence. Because some stories refuse to end. Decades later, urban explorers began visiting the abandoned building. They filmed videos, took photographs, and shared their experiences online. Many claimed they felt dizzy inside the apartment. Some heard distant crying. Others captured strange shadows moving in empty hallways. One explorer stayed longer than the others. He wanted real proof. He wanted something viral, something shocking. He brought a flashlight, a camera, and enough courage to spend the night alone. At first he laughed at the darkness. He walked through every room, describing the tragic history. He even found the remains of the old spirit board hidden under broken furniture. He placed it on the floor and began recording. Nothing happened for hours. Then suddenly his camera battery died. His flashlight flickered. A cold wind filled the apartment though all windows were closed. He heard a whisper very close to his ear. A girl's voice. Soft. Sad. "Why did you wake it?" His heart started racing. He tried to run toward the door but it slammed shut. Heavy footsteps echoed behind him. When he turned around, he saw a tall shadow blocking the hallway. He began to scream. Neighbors later reported hearing those screams. Police arrived and found the explorer unconscious near the entrance. His camera lay beside him. When they checked the footage, the final recording showed the spirit board moving on its own. Spelling one last message. The door is open. The explorer survived, but he refused to speak about that night ever again. Today the apartment still exists. Some say it has been renovated. Some say it remains abandoned. But people living nearby still talk about strange lights in the windows after midnight. They talk about a silhouette standing behind the curtains. Waiting. Watching. Sometimes, during storms, residents claim to hear faint scratching sounds coming from inside the walls. As if someone is trying to escape, or trying to get out. And once in a while, someone walking past the building feels an unexplained urge to look up at that dark window. For a brief second they think they see a young girl standing there. Her eyes empty, her lips moving silently, as if she is warning them, or inviting them. Because the most terrifying truth is not that evil exists. The most terrifying truth is that curiosity keeps calling it back. Somewhere tonight, someone will hear this story. Someone will feel brave enough to test it. Someone will draw letters on paper, place a glass in the center, and whisper into the darkness. Is anyone there? And maybe, something will answer.